Hello, folks. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing fine. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about. I'm going to do a recap, a little summary of what I said about the Hilsters, and then I'm going to move on to another gentleman, and his name is Nassim Haramein. He's quite an interesting fellow. Anyways, let's get started here. I'm gonna do first, like I said, a little review of the Hilsters and just a synthesis. And specifically, I want to focus while I'm doing that on what a wave is. Okay. Apparently, we have a problem also with the word wave. Okay. Um, so what was the problem? Well, the first problem was that we had a difference in opinion, apparently, uh, of what the definition of the word ether is. Okay, and yeah, he's got a different view of what the ether is. He didn't put his definition down, but here, like I promised the other day, I was gonna put in there. Okay, I was gonna put in there what Dave said about the ether, his notion of the ether. So I want you to uh, look at it and tell me if I'm off the mark. Uh, I'm saying that he says the same thing as I am saying, and that is the ether is just a bunch of particles. That's all it is. Okay, and here's what he said. Okay, first he said Bill's definition of ether is different from everyone else's. Okay, and then he went on to, he moved on to talking about ether and the difference between ether and particle models. In other words, he jumped to the theory. And that's a no-no. You can't go there until you know what the word ether means. And right now we're fighting for the word ether. Well, I define mine as a bunch of particles. And it turns out Dave did not define it, but he did essentially put comments that define it. As far as I'm concerned, you have to reach your own conclusion. But he says light in ether theories are waves in particles. In our particle model, they are waves of particles. And then he says in another comment, he says, ether theories describe light as particles. Our model describes light as particles. Okay, so yeah, it's like for some reason Dave does not like the word ether included in his theory, but he has an ether theory. You can see it up there. According to them, G1, G2, N1s, and N2s, so far at least, those four types of particles are the ones they're going to be working with. And they say that's all there is in the universe. And yeah, what they're describing is an ether. Okay. So, okay. So, as far as I'm concerned, he defined the ether just like me. He's saying that the ether is a bunch of particles. And in fact, anyone who defines it outside of that definition is not doing ether. Whatever they put down is nonsense. The ether has always been a bunch of particles. It served as some of them put them as the background, and some of them, like in the case of the Hilsters, they don't put it as a background. They say, look, our particles are the ones that move. Irrelevant, totally irrelevant. They have an ether theory because their starting assumption is that the universe is full of particles. Now, whether there are other particles that move through the ether or the ether itself moves, that's a secondary issue. We'll get there in a couple of years. Right now, we are still trying to figure out what the ether is. Ether is a bunch of particles. Anyone putting particles on the screen or on the paper or wherever on the blackboard, he's got an ether theory, whether he knows it or not. Ether means bunch of particles. It always has meant bunch of particles. That was before anyone moved the ether. It was always a bunch of particles. Okay. Okay. The other issue that they accuse me of is that I do not understand their theory, that I misrepresented it or misconceived it, misconstrued it. I don't know. But they say that this was the comment. Okay, and he says, these videos don't hold value given they show almost no understanding of our model. I don't see these videos having any value other than showing someone who is criticizing something that he does not understand. Okay, so they're saying I don't understand their model. Let's see if I do understand or not. Let's find out. Um, Here's what they propose. Okay, and again, you can see these are all their comments, by the way. None of this is mine. Okay, this is from their sites or from their videos, etc. Okay, and Dave says, in fact, in his Facebook, it's still there. I don't know, but I didn't check today. Maybe he erased it for all I know. But he says the particle model is a physical model of the universe. That is, all areas of physics can be explained using physical interactions of particles. Gravity, light, etc., can all be explained using particles. What is he talking about? He's talking particles, I think, right? And that's what I show on the upper right there. That's my picture, okay? And you can see that I put their particles there. Again, on the lower right, you see their particles, the ones they propose. The nucleon, which is the N1, there's also an N2. Then they propose the G1 and the G2. And these four particles are the ones that form all their body of particles. And that's what I illustrated. That's what I'm working with. And what you're staring at is known as the ether, bunch of particles. Okay? That's the starting point. Whether these particles move, whether there's a background, we don't care about any of that right now. Right now, we want to understand what is the ether. The ether is a bunch of particles, and that's what we're staring at, bunch of particles. And of course, what the proponent of particles or ether, either one, doesn't matter. If they think the ether is different than their particles, what they have to identify is the black stuff. And that's what no one has done in 10,000 years because no one defined the word nothing. And that's what that black stuff is, nothing. And since no one defined the word nothing, they just keep running around in circles. They say, well, the space is filled with blah, 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 blah. And they just say it's filled with. And they don't say what it is before it was filled or before God filled it or whatever, right? Okay, the important thing also here I want you to note is that they're saying the G1, lower right, the G1 particle is the one that's going to replace the electron, photon, and the graviton. As you can see, they're going to be inconsistent with that. It's not true. They're going to use the G2 as a graviton also. They're going to use G2 to do gravity, okay? So if you look at up there in the middle where I have their atom or representation of what I think their atom looks like, which is the planetary model, they have the G1 as the electron bead. They have the N1 as the nucleus, okay? Then they have these G2s that somehow produce the force of pull, I guess. Maybe I misrepresent that. Maybe they are going to have the G2 pushing on the G1 towards the nucleus. I'm not sure how they're going to do that. It's going to be kind of weird because the G1 moves all around at great speeds around the nucleus. So I had to give my hand there and say, well, look, if you're going to use the word binding, like in G2 is the nuclear binding force, atomic binding force, molecular binding force, and obviously the G2 is what they're going to use as the glue that holds the electron to the nucleus. But keep in mind that the G2 is not supposed to be a gravity particle. And later on, they're going to contradict that when they do their magnetism. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, what else do we have here? Well, here's how the Hilsters explain gravity. Let's see if I misrepresented anything. Again, I'm summarizing here. You'll get more detail if you go to the previous video here. I'm just going through it to summarize, make sure you get the main points. Okay, and here we have the Hilsters, and this is again from their sites. Okay, the Earth and the Moon are being pushed towards each other by the G1 particles passing through both objects. That's what I have with the red arrows on the lower right there. You'll see that the red arrows push the two objects together. You can think of the one on the left as the Earth, the one on the right as the Moon. There's fewer particles in between them and pushing them apart, and more particles pushing them towards each other. And so this is not the first time someone comes up with this. You've got Casimir Casimir effect is this same type of process or mechanism. Lesage, Fatio, right-hand man of Newton, and you've got also Descartes, René Descartes, the French guy, and another French guy, lesser known, Pierre Gassendi. All of them wrote about this mechanism. Specifically, this one is in Pierre Gassendi's book, which dates to 1642. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Hilsters didn't invent anything. But anyways, what's my criticism? The one on the top, upper right, you can see there are fewer blue particles leaving and more blue particles coming into an object. That happens to every object in the universe, according to the De Hilsters. That means that every object in the universe should be getting fatter. Okay, they should be bloating because there's more particles coming to their center of mass than are leaving their center of mass. Okay, so there are more particles hitting you than you hit, sending out. That's what they're saying. Why? Because you are shadowed. In other words, all the particles that try to leave are shadowed by whatever objects are around you. They prevent the particles from all the stars in the universe from reaching you. The walls of your house, that kind of thing. Okay. So this is their model. That's my criticism. I don't know how they're going to fix that in their theory. Okay, then we have their magnet. Okay, this is how they explain their magnetism. Upper left, that's Bob de Hilster's picture of the magnetic field around a coil, but it's the same thing. If you put a magnet, essentially it's the same thing. He did it with a coil, that's fine. And he's got that F2, that's the force 2, the force of the G2 particles, which contour and shape, according to them, the magnetic field around a magnet or a coil in this case, right? And so that's what I think I illustrated there. The one on the upper right, I have no G2 because that's the gravitational particles superimposed upon a magnet. You have to think that a magnet has a center of mass. So first we got to deal with its gravity, and there you see the gravity. G1s coming straight towards the center. Essentially, they go all over the magnet according to the De Hilsters, but more of them get sent in the direction of the center of mass. That's the G1 in blue. But then the G1 in yellowish greenish there, they're going around in a circle or in an oval, right? They're going right through the center of the magnet towards your left and on the outside of the magnet towards your right. And so we got a problem because, we have to superimpose these two G1 fields, one on top of the other. The magnetic field superimposed on or by the G1 gravitational field. Then at the bottom, we see the actual mechanism they propose for how a field is contoured. And they say it's the G2 particles which do it through gravity. See, you see at the bottom left there, G2 gravity pushing the magnets together. They're going to use the G2 to not only to mold the field and to push the G1s into the magnet, as you can see on the lower right. If you go east, completely east, those blue particles coming in there are designed to push the G1 into the magnet. Okay, so they're contouring the G1s that are swooshing around, the magnet. So the G2 is a gravitational G2 gravity. They're using that language. I'm not. This is from their site. They're using the G2 gravity particles to push the G1 magnetic particles. So I'm not misrepresenting anything. This is their word. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not misrepresenting anything. I'm not sure how they're going to cover all these holes in their theory. And one more thing here on this one, and that's how two magnets are attracted to each other. There you see it. The G2 is what's going to push two magnets together. Okay, that's how they do it. And so it's the G2 that not only contours and forms the magnetic field around the magnet. It's also the G2 that's going to gravitationally push the two magnets together. They're going to do everything with gravity. Okay, they're gravity people. Their G particles are all gravity particles. But as you saw before, the G1 is identified as an electron and as a photon and as a graviton. That's the gravity particle. But here they're using the G2 as the gravity particle when the G2 was originally intended to be only a binding force of some kind for molecular and atomic binding force. So I think, at least as far as I'm concerned, there's inconsistency here between how they define the G2 and how they use it. And it's up to you to reach your own conclusions. Okay, so let's move on here. They accuse me of being irrational, of being inconsistent. Okay, I thought I was quite consistent in all my definitions and what I laid down, but of course people have different opinions. Okay, so that's fine. I can dig it. This is what they say specifically. Okay, here we have it. Dave says, let me get this down here. Okay. Bill has logic that does not pass the most basic tenets, I guess he meant, tenets of consistency, not of conspiracy, consistency. Bill does not show self-consistency with his logic, a self-contradicting person. Okay, let's find out. Let's check logic against logic, rationality against rationality. Let's see where we stand, okay? And here's my counter argument to that, okay? So you can reach your own conclusions. I defined the word irrational. I had to define it because no one did in 1,000 years, first of all. But second, because I defined science as rational explanations. Science is divided into two branches. One is physics, the other one is philosophy. Physics is the one that deals with objects and tries to explain mechanisms and causes. Philosophy deals with purpose and reasons, and the bread and butter is the concept. Okay? So I defined what an irrational theory is, and that's one that converts a concept into an object and then starts, the theorist starts moving it around. And that's the main one. Also using undefined terms or misdefined terms. You got to really defend your definitions. And then the theory doesn't follow from your assumptions. And there we have the case of G2 not following from how it was initially defined. The G2 is defined as a binding force, and now it turns out that it's going to replace the G1 as a graviton, or doing gravity. Okay, so what is where do we have a problem? Well, Dave says Bill is wrong to say that waves don't exist. What do you mean doesn't exist? How does he define exist? Well, we have to go by Bob's book because that's what he uses as a foundation. And Bob defines an object as that which we can detect with our senses or instruments. Well, that's a problem because, an object is that which has shape, not which you can detect, because if you have to detect it, you need another object to do the detecting. Imagine a blind man, right? So the moon is not an object for a blind man. I mean, how does he detect it? Blind man can't touch the moon. He can't see it. I mean, we can see it. We can say, well, see, we can see it. We detected it. Yeah, we did, but the blind man did not. So the moon is not an object for the blind man. Even worse, if exist, real, means an object that moves, according to the Hilsters, well, the moon doesn't exist for the blind man, right? Because he can't see it. As far as he's concerned, it's not even in the universe. It doesn't exist. And you have people who say, well, what exists is what I can feel with my sense. Anything that's beyond my senses, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't exist. Yeah, but see, that's a subjective definition. You can't use that in science, specifically in physics. Physics, you have to use a definition you can use consistently, rationally. And we cannot leave it to subjective opinions. You cannot say, well, the moon doesn't exist because, I'm blind, I can't see it. Well, yeah, you can't, but I can. So does the moon exist or not? Is the moon an object or not? Well, for me, it's not an object because I can't see it. And for you, it's an object because you can see it. And let's continue. No, we can't continue. We got a problem. We got to define what the word is, object or something, and the word exist are in a precise, crisp way that we can use it consistently. And especially, it's got to be an objective definition. And that's what Dave does not do. And yeah, of course, he's going to suffer with my definitions. Let's see if I can put him back up here. So yeah, waves do exist, and according to De Hilster, right, waves do exist because he says, well, they are objects and they move, and so by definition, they are real. Well, the problem is that they've never learned that uh, a wave is not an object. It doesn't even pass the first criterion, an object. In my case, it's also, it's an object that has location. The wave does not pass the first part of that definition, which is being an object. And it's incredible that they've never learned this in high school or in college, that he never realized that he's not dealing with a physical object. So let's harp a little bit on waves so that we can cure some of the ills not only he has, but a lot of people out there who use the wave, especially all those wave theorists who talk about spherical waves and transverse waves, specifically those two. If you go back in time, you'll even find longitudinal waves representing light by people like Huygens and so on. Um, what is a wave? Well, let's find out. Um, Dave seems to think that this is a wave, the guy on the left. See, but the guy on the left is already moving. What happens if we make it stand still? What happens if we freeze it so that there is no motion? Well, now we don't have a wave. What's waving on the right-hand side? So you can see there's a difference between those two things, we can say, or those two images. The one on the left is a movie. It's a verb. It's not a noun. It's a verb. Something is moving. A bunch of particles that are waving up and down. That's a wave, what we call a wave, but that's not a physical object for the purposes of physics. The one on the right might be a physical object if it's made of a single piece, but that's not even an object because it's made of particles. But even that's better than the one on the left, which is moving. So Dave does not know the difference between a kangaroo and a jumping kangaroo. Okay, and here you see, which I presented a couple of weeks ago. Here's the difference between them. A kangaroo is the guy on the left, lower left, right? And a jumping kangaroo is not a physical object. Sorry. If it's moving, if it's jumping, you got to identify the object that is doing the moving, the jumping. In this case, only the guy on the left qualifies as an object because it's standing still. The word object, the word something, the word thing is a static concept. There's no motion involved in the definition of those. And in my case, I say it's that which has shape. In fact, in the case of the Hilsters, they say it's an object that you can touch or detect. Well, do you have to see it moving, or does it have to move in order to detect it? If you're seeing the moon, does the moon really have to move? I mean, can you see it in one still image and say, oh yeah, that's an object and it hasn't moved yet? Yeah, of course. You don't have to see the moon moving in order to identify it as an object, because the only property, universal property, all objects have is shape. So okay, here we have a little more. See if we can get this one up here. What is the difference between what these people propose and I propose so that you can see a contrast? The one on the left is what everyone in the universe, as of today, at least everyone on Earth, past and present, okay, suggest we do light with. They say it's a bunch of particles. And I put it as a finite bunch of particles. Some people imagine it as an infinite bunch of particles. Fine, and let's proceed with that for the time being. You can see that that's different than what I've got on the right, because some people accuse me and say, well, you got an ether too. No, it's not an ether, and you got to understand the difference between them. A bunch of particles, discrete particles, loose particles, which are not connected, is ether, and that's not the same thing as interconnected particles. In fact, I'm going to be talking about that with this fellow Nassim Haramein. Okay, if they're interconnected, like in my case, that's not an ether. Okay, that's a totally different proposal. And there's also a different mechanism. You can see at least the quantum version, which is the one on the lower left, and you see the quantum jump. An atom generates light, electromagnetic waves, when a little electron bead, as they see it, jumps back and forth between energy levels. When it jumps back and forth, it absorbs and releases, okay, what they call photons. And these photons are sometimes presented as waves, which is what you see on that inclined group of particles that are waving here. So sometimes they say, well, it's waves. If we want to explain polarization, if we want to explain maybe the slit experiment, they'll use waves typically. And then when they want to talk about, like the Compton effect or photoelectric effect, well, they'll use particles, which is the one on the bottom. And you can see that, first of all, you would have to represent this in the model that the Hilsters are presenting, because how are they going to present this in their particle model? So that's one question that you got to keep in mind if you ever decide to read their book. On the other hand, in my case, you can see on the lower right there, two atoms are interconnected by a rope. And as they expand and contract, they cause what is called quantum jump, okay, and they torque the rope. And the torsion along that rope, which is bidirectional, by the way, compared to their one directional mechanisms, this is bidirectional and reaches both atoms at both ends. And that's what light is. That's why light travels in both directions in my mechanism, in my system. Okay. Okay. Let's put this up here. Here's how the rope is constructed, just in case the how the atom is constructed. Okay, you see two ropes. They fork out at the boundary of the atom. One goes straight across and the other one goes around. That's essentially with a proposal. The electric and magnetic are just labels to be consistent with tradition. And then what you have there is every atom in the universe has ropes converging upon our atom. And our atom looks more or less like this. Okay, the ropes stop at the electron shell, and then what continues are single straight lines, okay, which are these threads that make up the rope. Okay, so that's the model, okay, for the atom. The question is whether in the case of the Hilsters model, you can have two waves, transverse waves, moving perpendicular to each other if they're made of particles, because they're going to do their thing with particles, remember that. And the red one there is supposed to be going perpendicular to the white ones. Okay, so the waves of light, in other words, the electric wave, electric field in this case, vibrates up and down, whereas the other one goes across, crossing it through the middle. I'm not sure how you can do that, how you can imagine particles just crossing each other, okay, in a crosswise way, 90 degrees exactly, for any proponent of ether or particles. So this is what they could never visualize. They, a guy like Maxwell, he wasn't able to visualize this. He was able to describe it mathematically, but he could not picture this, in physical terms. And that's the problem that we have still, we still have today. These people cannot visualize their particle models. And that's why they have to use, the fancy words which they never defined, like field and energy and virtual particles. And they have all these weird things. When they want to explain something, they bring the wave, and you say, wave of what? Well, we covered that in the other class. And when you go to that other class, what did you find? Well, they had particles, and they could never, illustrate the movement of one going up and down, the other one going across it, right in the middle, like that, like that. So they cannot simulate this with particles going across and particles going up and down. And so what do they do instead? Well, they go in there and they use something like this. Let's see if I can get it. Yeah. This is what they put. And people look at that and say, okay, I understand that. No, you don't, because you're not staring at an object. That's not a physical object. What they've done is they created all these vectors with magnitude and direction. That's what those arrows stand for. And they set it in motion. And so you think you're looking at an object that's moving from left to right. You're not. That's a mathematical contraption that you're staring at there. The famous field is just a bunch of numbers. It's values that stand for magnitude and direction. That's what those arrows are for. So you're not staring at an object, but they make you believe that you, they make you believe that you're staring at an object, and nobody questions this. And Dave thinks that what he just saw, what you just saw there, he thinks that's a physical object. And of course, then since it's moving, he says, well, it exists because my definition of real is an object that moves. And of course, we got an object that's moving, so we have an object. So it's real that they exist. This is the problem. It is a language problem primarily. Okay. Okay. Here I show another version of that. Okay. Let's see if I can get it up there. No, it's still the same one. This one. Wrong one. There we go. Here you see two waves. One is going across the other. Imagine these were ropes, because that's what they simulate standing waves with. You know, if you go to college or even in high school, they'll show you a standing wave, and you can even look up on the internet. You'll find a lot of cases here where they shake a rope up and down, or some kind of elongated object, a slinky maybe, and they'll move it up and down. Okay. Now, transverse wave. I'm sorry. The light is comprised of two transverse waves, and these two waves are perpendicular to each other. They run perpendicular to each other. So how would you simulate this with a rope, with two ropes? Could you move a rope up and down, have the other one cross it? You can't do that. See, you can't simulate this with particles, with elongated objects. You can't do that any way that you look at it. You can't simulate. And that's the problem. They cannot simulate it physically. And so the question is, if you can't simulate it physically, how can Dave say that this is an object and that it exists? We got a problem. Show me, in the lab, show me, simulate it with a rope or with a bunch of balls. I don't know, throw balls in such a way that they go up and down. And let me tell you what the problem is. Let's see if I can find it here. This is the problem. The problem is that you would have to have all these little balls tied together, one to the other. So when one goes up, it raises the one behind it, and so on down the line. So they have to be attached. They have to be connected in order to do this. You cannot do this with loose balls. You cannot do this with just a string of balls that are not connected to each other. I mean, I challenge anyone to get a bunch of tennis balls and see if they can get to reproduce this. Unless you tie them together somehow with a little string, a little thread, then you can move the whole bunch of particles up and down. And then you can create a standing wave. But you cannot create a standing wave, which is essentially what a transverse wave is. It moves up and down perpendicular to the direction of motion. Okay? You can't do that with loose, discrete balls. And that's why they never represent that physically anywhere. Especially in a lab. They can't do that in a lab unless they tie, all the little balls together with a thread. Then they can do it. Okay. So this is the problem. The problem is that anyone using tiny beads, corpuscles, particles, call them what you will, to simulate light, especially the wave nature of light, the wave aspects of light, yeah, he's cheating. He can't do that. He can't do it in the lab. He cannot even imagine one going up and down, the other one going right through it. He would have to explain how they managed to go right through each other. Okay. Okay. What else do I have here? Again, they accused me of being irrational, not being consistent. I think it's the other way around. The people who are not consistent are them. And I showed that last time as well. Here you have Bob the Hilster defining the word object as that which we detect. And again, that requires a second object. Then he goes on to motion, where he uses the word change and time. And those two words involve motion already. So he's just using synonyms. And then what struck me, Dave's comment, is that he said that they do physics with apparently particles that don't exist. I don't know if they were just being facetious or what. Okay, they say their model uses particles that don't exist. So I think they're being inconsistent. Look at mine now. See if I'm being inconsistent in anything. I define something, in other words, an object, as that which has shape, and nothing as that which doesn't have shape. I define them in terms of shape, not in terms of each other. So now we can use these two words consistently because they are perfect antonyms of each other. And again, neither one is defined in terms of the other. Okay. What is exist? Well, exist is just an object, something, right, that has location. If it doesn't have location, like the table I'm imagining, well, that table does not exist by definition. If God wants to exist, he's just going to have location. Okay, it's just that simple. And if God does not have location, that means he doesn't have distance between my chest and his chest. Well, God doesn't exist by definition. And maybe he exists for the church people or Sunday schoolers, that's fine, but not in physics. In physics, he does not exist because exist means an object that has location. God first has to be an object. If he's love and grace and intelligence, well, he doesn't even qualify as an object. Okay, so it's the word object that destroys all religion, including the one that the Hilsters are peddling. Okay. Okay, so what was my conclusion last time is that, the Hilster is doing politics. That's what he's doing. These people, they're in the process of recruiting. That's I think their game. Okay, they're trying to recruit, and they care about the numbers. And he says there, you and many choose to remain in your network of one, which becomes entrained in one's own logic and vocabulary. Well, no, because I do debate with anyone who wants to debate me. I do debate, especially the foundations. And of course, that's what the Hilster wants to skip. He wants to go directly into mechanisms, theories, and models. He doesn't want to define the words because, as you can see, they can't define even the most basic terms of physics. But he says, I see this in many people who in the end, could truly advance science instead of being a curiosity and being left behind. Obviously, he is in the in the business of recruiting. He thinks it's a question of numbers, of getting more people, just numbers, just come and help us so we can fight the establishment. What's his goal? His goal is to recruit people who oppose the establishment rather than people who propose rational explanations for mechanisms, which is what physics is about. So he's not into physics. He's just into criticizing the establishment. Oh, look, black holes, look, space-time. And he's right about that. I mean, he's a good critic for that. So is Wal Thornhill from the Electric Universe. All these people are good critics. Ken Wheeler, all these people are good critics. They criticize the establishment, and they're pretty good at it. What they don't have is anything to propose in exchange. So what they've done is just, carve a niche in the dissident market. That's essentially where these people stand today. And all they're doing now is just collecting whoever's out there who hates the establishment and say, hey, come and join our group. You hate the establishment, we do too. So come on over here, we bash them together. And all they do is bash, but they don't propose. Because what they propose is the same nonsense as the establishment. What does Wal Thornhill and his Electric Universe people propose? Plasma. What is plasma? A bunch of particles. Why is it a bunch of particles? Because they're using Bohr's quantum particle model. What does Dave Hilston propose? Particles. Now that's a novel thing. I never heard of it. 10,000 years and finally came up with the right proposal. Particles. Who would have thought of that? Yeah, it's been around forever. All these people have ever been doing is particles because it's the first thing that comes to people's minds. No one ever thought that all these so-called atoms are interconnected, physically interconnected. And that's where my proposal differs from all of theirs. All of theirs. Not one person talks about connection except Mr. Haramein, but I'll get to that in a second here. Okay, anyways, that's my take on what the Hilsters do. Okay, so let's see if we can move on. Let's go to Mr. Nassim Haramein. Okay. Am I there yet? There he is. Yeah. Let me get organized here. Got so many of these sometimes. Okay, so who is Mr. Haramein? Well, he's a televangelist. That's what he is. He does a lot of religion, sneaky religion. He kind of sends it, gradually in there, little by little. Says, no, look, I'm doing physics. But just about everywhere you'll find that religious connotation because he's trying to introduce the soul, spirituality, conscience, somehow consciousness. I'm sorry. Uh, he's trying to filter it in there. Okay, that's his goal. That's his real goal. And I think part of that goal is he's trying to corner another market, not only the dissident market, but he's also trying to get the Buddhists and all these people who believe in an interconnected universe. He wants those people in there with him, and he's also trying to get physicists, mathematical physicists. Obviously, they're not even physicists, but he's trying to get all these mathematical physicists who have some doubts and are looking maybe for a better model. He says, "Hey, come join me. See, I not only have invented some equations that modified Einstein's stuff, but I'm also relating it in a bigger picture, which includes the soul, consciousness. So I'm merging all physics with the spirituality and all this stuff. That's what he's trying to do. That's why that's his market. That's what he's trying to obtain. That's his goal, to try to conquer these people. And again, he's carving a niche in the dissident market, a semi-dissident market, because he uses just about everything from the establishment, including black holes, uh, particles. He's into that. He's into quantum and relativity, but he wants to introduce Tesla, vortices, and those words are taboo in the mainstream. So mainstream doesn't like those words. When you introduce Tesla in there, vortices, and that kind of thing, plasma, they don't like to hear those words. They know those are taboo words for the establishment. You don't bring those words in there, and that's what this guy's trying to do. He's trying to get some people from over there. He's trying to see if he can get some people that believe that there's something wrong with quantum, that it's not a complete theory. He's trying to get these people. In fact, my youngest son, Adrian, he said, "Hey, you should peddle your theory to the Buddhists. They'll love your theory." And there is a reason for that. Mine is an interconnected universe. I'm saying every atom in the universe is physically connected, interconnected. And imagine the Buddhists, who've been saying now for thousands of years, we're one with the universe. Everything is connected. And relativists in quantum, they say, you guys are all a bunch of idiots. You're doing religion. You should learn from science. It's discrete particles. And now the Buddhists can say, hold it. Here's a new model. It's an interconnected model where all atoms are interconnected. Maybe the idiots are the people who do quantum mechanics and general relativity. So now they can have an upper hand in the sense that they can say, not only are we spiritually connected, which is what Haramein's argument, but we are physically connected. Here's the model. So he was saying I should peddle it to the Buddhists. Okay, fine. So what does Mr. Haramein do for a living? Well, let's see. See if we can get him up here. This is what he does for a living. He created an organization called Resonance, and I circled it in red there. Everything is connected, and we have the science to prove it. He's in the business of proving. Well, in science we don't prove, so Guru Nassim has not learned that basic issue. We don't prove. Prove means that you're going to go out there with the Bible and a missionary, and you're going to convert the heathen. That's what proof means, okay? In science, we don't prove. In science, we explain a mechanism so that you understand it, and that's where science stops. Whether you believe it or not is your personal business. It doesn't concern anybody else, okay? So that's what proof means, and what proof is really outside the bounds of physics or science. And he founded a nonprofit organization, also Resonance Project Foundation, where he is the director. Okay, and he continues to explore, as I put there, how to become a successful televangelist. I mean, this guy is in the process of recruiting people just to make money, and he's trying to carve a niche in the dissident market. Okay, and here's one guy he would like to emulate. This guy asked he's a pastor, and he asked his followers to send him $54 million so he can buy a fourth jet. The other three are not good enough. He wants to spread the word throughout the world a little faster. And Nassim really would love to be like Jesse Duplantis. He would really love to be like that, have a lot of money and fly around the world. That's his goal. He's not into science. You've got to be kidding me if you really think that Nassim is doing science. Okay, so what does Nassim propose? Well, here's a summary of what he proposes. I get this out of different sources. Especially, he had a movie called The Connected Universe. Okay, and so what is he saying? He's saying everything is connected. I put the inter in there because essentially he's saying everything's interconnected. Okay. Physically, what connects us is space. Now that's interesting because I say space is nothing. So if space is nothing, it cannot connect to somethings. If anything, it separates them. Okay. But let's continue. What is space? Well, according to Nassim, space is a physical object. It's a physical object. Okay, it's something. It's not nothing, like I say. Okay, not that which doesn't have shape. It's that which has shape somehow. And he says space is the fluctuation of the vacuum. Okay, let me put proof and evidence, so you know that I haven't come up with this on my own. This is all from his site. Okay, and here it is. Okay, he says. Space is what's connecting everything. Space is what everything emerged from and returned to. Space is the great organizer. Space is the thing that connects all things. Okay, so we don't have any nothings in the universe. All we have is things connected by things, and space is one of those. Great. That gathers the information of all knowledge of every point in space. What does information and knowledge have to do with physics? These are concepts. So if space gathers information and bunches up all this knowledge, that's great. Knowledge is, if anything, is what a person has, not what space has. Okay, but we continue. If we look at all the little fluctuations of the vacuum, the amount of energy inside the proton, which, by the way, he is the first person on Earth, according to him, right, that measured the exact mass of the proton, whereas the establishment is 4% off. Okay, just keep that in mind. That's what he's going to get his Nobel for. Okay, it says inside the proton in the vacuum fluctuation, the mass of the vacuum inside the little teeny proton in the center of an atom is equivalent to all other protons' mass in the universe. That is, all the rest of the matter in the universe is represented holographically. Oh, we're talking about holograms here. By the vacuum fluctuation inside one little proton, so that one little proton is connected to all other protons in the universe. Well, he still hasn't explained how it's connected. He's just stating that. What this guy's doing is inventing words, word wizardry, like Ken Wheeler does, in Theoria Apophasis. All these guys invent dielectricity and counter space, and they use all these words, undefined words that they haven't, they never took the trouble to define specifically and crisply and unambiguously. And this guy's doing the same thing. He's assuming you know what all these words mean, and he just throws them around. I mean, what has he said? He hasn't said anything. Okay? And he says, point number 5 here, space is made of fluctuating energy. Oh my God. And he does say here that, I think that's in the center there, said, where is it? Somewhere he used the word energy. Oh, if we look at all the little fluctuations of the vacuum, the amount of energy inside the proton in the vacuum fluctuation, the mass of the vacuum inside the little teeny proton in the center, is equivalent to blah, 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 blah. Okay, what he's saying is space is energy as well. A space, see, all these people say space is something. What is it? Well, it's energy. What is energy? I forgot to define that. And so I got to put the picture of what he's referring to. Here's you have the sun and the earth. And when he's saying everything is connected by space, which is energy, which is that thing that I put it there in the middle. Now that's what's connecting them. What is that stuff? What is that energy that we think of, that we imagine being some kind of foam or some kind of smoke or whatever you think of it as? And so we got to go to a Nobel Prize to define it for us because we're not smart enough to do this. So let's have Mr. Richard Feynman define it for us. It is important to realize that in physics today we have no knowledge of what energy is. Anyone using the word energy is talking poppycock. No one knows what energy is. Okay? No, that we don't have a definition of the word energy. Okay? So that's the issue. The other issue is that if you look it up, Wikipedia says energy is a quantitative property that must be transferred. We transfer properties. I mean, unless you're talking about transferring, your house or something, maybe like that. But we don't transfer attributes and properties. Okay, we don't transfer aspects. And it says energy is conceptually and mathematically useful property. Again, shows that they're talking about something abstract. You don't transfer abstractions. And they clarify energy is a core concept. So it is a concept. We don't transfer concepts. Again, that's all irrational. Anyone who says that space is made of fluctuating energy, well, he's fluctuating a concept. That's what he's doing. And there you see two more definitions, one from dictionary.com. Energy is the capacity, and in Quora you'll find energy is the ability. So again, energy is a property. We don't transfer properties, okay? What we do, we transfer, let's see, got the wrong one. What we transfer is, where is it here? What we transfer is objects. That's what we transfer. We transfer tables, we transfer trees, rocks. We don't transfer love. We don't transfer energy. We don't transfer fields. Unless it's a football field that you took it in a couple trucks and transferred it. We don't transfer concepts. Anyone who transfers concepts like charge, like plasma, those are all concepts. Is an irrational individual, or like my son prefers to say it, he's got an irrational theory. Okay. Let's finish up here. What Haramein is in is that last point here. Let's see if I can get it here. And that's consciousness. And he says, because this is in his website, Nassim discovered a specific geometric array that is fundamental to creation. Creation? What is creation? That sounds quite religious to me. How did he create the first bit of matter? Was it God or who? His unification theory, a new solution to Einstein's field equation, his recent paper, blah, 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 laid down the base of what could be a fundamental change in our current understandings of physics and consciousness. Aha. Our heart is how, and then he makes a comment in his movie, right? He says, our heart is how we feel all the things that we can't see. So we feel with our heart. Boy, that sounds quite esoteric to me, quite spiritual. And when we integrate the power of imagination with the love and strength of our heart, our whole world will change, bringing hope for a better future. Our heart is part of a grand connection to the universe. I thought he was going to do physics. What is he talking about? He's talking about, nonsense here. He's selling spirituality. He's selling consciousness. And that's really his sales pitch. He's into something else. He's into, consciousness and Buddhism and maybe, doing asanas or whatever. And I know a little bit about that because I took Buddhism in college. But what is he really into, this fellow Haramein? He's into not only spirituality and consciousness, he wants to save the world. And he thinks that if you follow his prescriptions, it is possible. So he starts out by saying humanity is on a course that is unsustainable. Okay, that's in his movie. We are discovering that there is another invisible field. Field? There is a field? What's a field? A football field or a cocaine field? What kind of fields are these? And the source of the material world that is all around us and in large quantities. And by learning how to tap into its structure, so far as he knows structure, we could power our world for generations to come. So he's on a crusade to save the world. And he says, imagine what we could do if we could create the same type of depression, the same type of gradient change in the structure of the fluctuation of the vacuum itself. The space would curve and generate what Einstein described as gravity and space-time curvature. By doing so, we could control the gravitational field. Is it possible to create the gradient in the structure of the vacuum itself? We already do this with the Casimir effect, which is what the Hilsters propose. Remove stuff between two things and the pressure from the outside will push them together. That's the Casimir effect, where we create the little gradient between the two plates that forces the plates to be pushed together. We are able to pop little photons right out of the vacuum. Oh, magic. He pops photons out of the vacuum, no longer out of atoms. We're actually already extracting little bits of energy directly out of the vacuum. So you can see what these people do. They're all into this esoteric stuff. They're in the process of recruiting. Who are they recruiting? They're recruiting people who oppose the establishment, dissidents, intelligent people who look and say something's wrong with what the establishment is selling us. Establishment talks about black holes. That's nonsense. Space-time, that's nonsense. Big Bang, that's more nonsense. Dark matter, dark energy, what is all that garbage? Particles traveling backwards in time because they travel so fast, the tachyons, that they beat the photon of light, which Einstein says nothing can go faster than that, but they clean their butts with all that, and they say, yeah, we invented the tachyon, it can travel backwards. They use these words, by the way, in many of in the literature, and when they publish their papers. And time dilation, you can go back, kill your grandfather so you're not born, that kind of thing. It's all idiocy, all 100% idiocy. And a lot of intelligent people out there say, yeah, this is garbage. What's coming out of Cambridge and Harvard and all these places is nonsense. So they look for an alternative. Who do they fall with? They fall with these televangelists who are in the process of recruiting. And that is their goal, to recruit, because they just care about numbers and money and making a career out of it. So what you got to look at is what these people have to propose in exchange for what they find in the establishment. Then you can make a clear decision. Look at what they propose, not at what they criticize. They're all great critics. Okay, they're all great critics. And in this sense, we're all more or less in the same boat. But it's what they propose in exchange. They're proposing the same thing as the establishment. Not as wild. They don't talk about black holes and, Big Bang and space-time, but they do talk about nonsense. They talk about particles and waves. There are no such things as waves. Waves means movement of particles, waving up and down of particles. So the issue is still particles. Can you do anything with particles? Can you explain two magnets, why they come together? Can you explain that with particles? The answer is no. You cannot, not rationally. You can do some hocus pocus like the Hilsters do, or like Ken Wheeler does with his magic. He just moves concepts around, the dielectricity and the counter space and the inertial and the radial, a lot of garbage. Because what is the flow of? The flow of, it's a counterspatial. Here's the counterspatial flow. Yeah, what is a counterspatial? Is it a bunch of particles? What's flowing? I mean, the river even has a flow of what? Water, you can say, yeah, and then what is the water made of? Molecules, atoms, whatever, So you got to have a physical object to do physics. Anyone who's not a materialist should get the hell out of physics and not clog the hallways, okay? Do your religious bunk somewhere else. That's the problem. The problem, these people are absorbing people who would otherwise find a good model to oppose the establishment. And instead, they go from Catholicism to Islam. That's all they did. They just changed religion. That's all they did. Okay, anyways, Nassim Haramein, not worth a penny. He's only a televangelist trying to get rich. That's all. He founded these organizations supposedly to investigate physics. What he's trying to do is stick spirituality into you. He wants you to become a spiritualist and to support his goal of making a better world, by harnessing and harvesting the energy from, as he says, 1 centimeter cube of space. He says if we could harness 1 centimeter cube of space, of empty space, of nothingness, we could power the earth for 1 million years. Now, how's that for magic? And what does Bill Gates say? Well, those of you who know me, I say we're the last humans on earth. So there is no future. And of course, that's not a very popular thing to say. My theory will never be popular until the last day, and everybody sees hell coming down upon them. Yeah, we're the last humans on earth, so there is no way of saving ourselves. We will become extinct very soon. And that's a long story. Those of you who want, they can look me up and find out why I believe we're the last humans. But anyways, a little different perspective than what Nassim Haramein has. He believes we're going to live 1 million years if we just follow his prescription. Okay, then we'll see you on, Sunday, next Sunday. And maybe we'll go with another dissident. We'll find out. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.